Hey, I'm Dr. Nate Bosch, and I'm here at my friend Diane Quantz's house on Pike Lake. She's a great partner of ours in many ways. And what I want to show you here on this property is some good examples of what lakefront property owners and even non-lakefront property owners can do on their property to help protect our lakes and streams. So we're going to talk about nutrients, we're going to talk about filter strips, we're going to talk about lawn fertilization here today. So let's start with probably the most obvious thing, which is this filter strip, which is right here alongside me. So we have a channel on Pike Lake right here beyond this concrete seawall. You can't see it, but there's some glacial stones up against that seawall, which helps dissipate some of the wave energy that might come in and normally would bounce back off and go to the other side of the lake, down scour some sediments and bring nutrients back up into the water for weeds and algae to grow. In front of that seawall, we've got some vegetation. We call that a filter strip. Some will call it a buffer strip. What's ideal is if you can have that buffer, that filter, be native plants. The reason that we like native plants rather than non-native plants would be that those native plants are going to have root structures that are going to be deep and help pull in a lot of water and nutrients before it gets to the lake, hold sediments really well with those strong root structures. They're also going to be well conditioned for our climate. Here we're in northern Indiana, and so we've got some harsh winters at times, and we even get some droughts in the summertime. So these native plants are going to be able to withstand those extreme conditions better than some of the non-native plants that you might buy at a more typical greenhouse or big box store. So we like our native plants along here. We have some horsetail rush. We'll go around and show you some specific examples here in a little bit. And we've got some wildflowers, some forbs back here behind me. We also have a turf grass lawn right here, just on the shore side of the lake, just past the filter strip. And on the lawn, oftentimes there's fertilizer that goes on it. There's sometimes irrigation, rainstorms will bring water in it, and that's going to tend to wash things towards the lake. And so if we have that filter strip, that'll be interception, if you will, of those things as they move towards the lake. We don't want the excess nutrients getting to our lake, which can cause those excess weeds and algae to start to grow. And so we want to intercept that with the filter strips. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at some specific examples of the plants that Diane has planted here, which you might consider on your own yard. We're going to look at specifically her yard and how she maintains her yard, the actual turf grass portion of her yard. But before we start to look at some of those individual things, I want to talk a little bit about those nutrients, about fertilizer, which would typically be placed on a lawn here close by the lake. Fertilizer is always going to have three components to it. If you look at a bag of fertilizer, it's going to have three numbers on the bag somewhere. The first number is going to be your nitrogen number. Second number is phosphorus. And third is potassium. Nitrogen is something that's needed for all green plants, and oftentimes that will really help perk up a yard, help it grow green, help it deal with any damage that might be caused from trampling or heavy use in certain areas. Phosphorus is that middle number. Phosphorus is the one that causes the most problem for our streams and lakes. It's what's called the limiting nutrient in our freshwater ecosystem. So the more phosphorus means the greener the lake is going to become. We don't want to see those excess weeds. They can impact recreation. They can start to choke out the environment when they're overabundant. We also don't want to see algae or phytoplankton, which can also grow from that phosphorus once it gets into the lake. That algae could even be toxic algae like blue-green algae, which can be harmful to people and pets who want to use and enjoy the lake. And then that third part is potassium, and potassium is usually needed in lesser amounts. What we encourage people who live on streams and on lakes here in our county to use is what we call phosphorus-free fertilizer. So that middle number of the three numbers is 0, no phosphorus. The reason we can get away with that and still have beautiful plants like lawn grass is because we have a fair amount of phosphorus naturally in our soils here in Kosciuszko County and really throughout a lot of the Midwestern United States. And so we don't need the phosphorus to have healthy plants, healthy lawns around our homes. So phosphorus we want to be 0, and even when we're in general using fertilizer, we want to use only as much as what our yard needs. If we put extra fertilizer on, if you're looking at the bag of fertilizer and it has certain application rate to use for your fertilizer spreader, and you say, oh, well, if this much is good, then doubling it must be better. We don't want to do that, all right? What's that excess gonna do? The grass can only take up so much, those grass plants. The excess is gonna simply run off with the next big rain event or snow melt during the winter time, and it's gonna end up in our lake. And the weeds and algae in the lake are gonna be happy to take up that phosphorus, but the people using the lake are gonna be unhappy that those weeds and algae are using up that extra phosphorus because they're gonna grow too much in an unhealthy sort of a way, all right? So we want to limit total amount of fertilizer. We want to make sure that middle number is 0. Let's go around now and look at some specific features here of this lakefront property and maybe inspire you for some things you might want to do on yours. Here's one of the plants that I want to highlight. This is called swamp milkweed. One of the reasons I love this plant, it's got a beautiful presentation and it's flowering time, but also it's really versatile. Here we've got it planted up from the seawall a little bit, so it's a little bit drier, but it can also deal with its feet wet or its roots in pretty saturated soils. And so it's a good plant that's versatile. Butterflies love it, which is another reason that I love this plant, other pollinators as well. Swamp milkweed. Here's the second plant that I wanted to highlight for you. This is a native hibiscus, also known as swamp mallow. By the name, you would expect that it can deal with wet conditions, also drier conditions. One of the other things I like about this is it starts small and it starts to spread out into more of a shrub-like appearance. It also allows some of its neighbors to kind of intermix with it a little bit for some diversity in the plants as well. This is swamp mallow, also known as native hibiscus. All right, here's the third plant that we're going to highlight. This is called black-eyed Susan, maybe the most popular of the 3 types we just talked about. This is the native variety of black-eyed Susan, and so it can expand fairly aggressively, and so put it in a spot that you don't mind it to get a little bit bigger. I love these blooms on it. They stay week after week, sometimes a couple months, depending on the weather conditions that particular year. These do well in a pretty dry environment as well, so keep that in mind as you're planting it. They do fine getting closer to the lake as well, as you can see here. This is called black-eyed Susan, another great native plant. Let's focus in on lawn maintenance. When you first look at this yard, you see we've got a beautiful green color here. We've got some striping from a recent mowing. Notice how the grass plant is a little bit taller than you might expect in a lot of other mowed yards. That's going to allow the grass plant to be healthier than it would when it's cut really short. This yard, Diane says she doesn't have to add fertilizer. She doesn't have to irrigate it by allowing it to be a little longer. And when she does mow it, she mulches those grass clippings. So those grass clippings then fall down into the base of the grass plant. And as they decompose, give off small amounts of nutrients for that grass plant to be healthier. So you can avoid the fertilizer. If you really insist on needing fertilizer for your lawn, remember we're going to go to phosphorus free. So we want that middle number of the 3 numbers to be 0. So we've got the 29, which is the nitrogen amount, 0, which is phosphorus, so that's phosphorus free, and then 3 is our potassium. These are some great examples you can do on your yard as well. All right, let's recap what we learned today. When we have a lakefront property like this, or really any property, because all properties are going to eventually drain into a river or a lake, we want to be mindful of the water that flows off our property. We've got some beautiful filter strips here. We've talked about lawn fertilization, but I want to leave you with 3 things that really everybody can do on their own property to help protect our local waterways. The first is what we've been talking a lot about, which is filter strips. This is, again, a stretch of preferably native plants that intercepts water as it's running off your property. A lake property is typically going to slope towards the lake, and so we want to keep those excess nutrients and sediments out of the lake. But even a property not on a lake, you're having water flow across your property, and that water is going to end up in a stream or a lake. And so filter strip is the first thing that everybody can think of. Second thing would be fertilizer. We want to use phosphorus-free fertilizer. Our soils typically don't need extra phosphorus added, and that phosphorus is going to cause a problem downstream for a river or a lake. And then the third thing that everybody can do is being mindful of your yard waste. We don't want to see those extra grass clippings, those leaves end up in a water body. If you're on a lake, it's pretty obvious. You don't want to blow those things into the lake. If you're not on a lake, it might be less obvious, but you don't want to let those things get into the gutter along the street or into a storm drain, because those are going to go directly to a river or a lake as well. So filter strips, no phosphorus fertilizer, and composting those lawn waste items. Those are something that everybody can do to help protect our lakes and streams. So excited we could be here at Diane's beautiful lakefront property on Pike Lake, and we're hopeful it was an inspiration to you for some things you can do on your property as well.